Dear ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to the meeting of European Business Association. And today we have a special guest, Kurt Volker, whom you probably know actually from the previous his experience. He is ambassador and he is leading expert in US national and foreign policy, security policy, and you have more than 30 years experience in different public, academic and private institutions. And obviously this kind of, variety of your capacities give you really wide range of possibilities to understand how the situation is going to evolve. When I was reading about your credentials, I was really amazed what a number of different functions you have been responsible for. So having that in mind, having said so, I would like to ask you, have you ever anticipated this kind of full-scale invasion in Ukraine? And if yes, do you think what would be the most probable scenarios for further development of the situation?
Well, thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be with you and great to speak with all of your members as well. Thank you for having me. To answer your question, no, I never thought that there would be such a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia because it's stupid. I thought that Putin would try to make limited grabs. Take territory in the east, take territory in the south, keep it off the radar enough that it didn't rouse Europe, it didn't rouse the United States. But instead, by launching this full-scale invasion, he created the opposition to him that he didn't want. And we see much greater support for Ukraine from the European Union now than ever before, much greater support from the United States militarily, much more willingness to support Ukraine in fighting back against Russia. I was 2 years special representative for Ukraine. We never had this degree of solidarity with Ukraine before. So Putin really, he created his own problem. He made an irrational step by trying to take over all of Ukraine. It created the opposition he didn't want. And now I think it actually is going very much against Russia. And we can continue to talk about that. But no, I didn't think about that because it's illogical. And now he's stuck with the consequences of his actions.
The whole business community was never also thinking that this kind of invasion could happen because it's illogical. And if you would ask every, CEO of member company before the war started, everybody would say the same. But nevertheless, it happened. It happened, and we live in this terrible situation now in Ukraine, and businesses try to adjust. And obviously, it's very difficult to understand in which kind of direction it will go further and for how long this kind of barbarian war is going to exist. What is your sense on that? What is your estimation of the most probable scenarios?
Well, first off, let's rule out two scenarios. A defeat of Ukraine. Russia, even Lavrov just the other day is talking about regime change and denazification and all of this nonsense. There is no way that Russia can defeat Ukraine. So Ukraine survives as a sovereign, independent European democracy, full stop. We know that. The second scenario is that Ukraine pushes Russian forces out of Russian territory quickly. That is to say, maybe by the end of the year, something Zelensky brought up. I don't see it happening that quickly. So somewhere in between, you have a sovereign Ukraine that is fighting to recapture its territory, and it's making progress, but it's not making decisive and definitive progress this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after. Mm-hmm. At some stage, Ukraine is able to push Russian forces back. The critical areas that we're looking at now, in the summer of 2022, are Kherson, where Ukraine has embarked on a counteroffensive and will likely retake Kherson. Second is pushing Russian forces further back from Kharkiv. And third is breaking the land bridge that connects Rostov and Donbass with Crimea. This is why the Russians spent so much effort trying to destroy Mariupol and to break the resistance there, to create this land bridge. I think the Ukrainian forces will now interrupt the land bridge. not necessarily by controlling a lot of territory, but by making the ground line of communication, the supply route from Donbass to Crimea unworkable. And by interrupting that, that will also put pressure on Russian forces in the south and protect Mykolaiv and Odessa. So those things will happen. The next thing, I think you also see further progress on pushing Russian ships back and getting grain exports out of Odessa, maybe by hugging the western coast of the Black Sea through territorial waters of Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria. This is what I think the next phases are. But this means that there will be a protracted period of conflict along a line in eastern Ukraine, now bigger than it used to be, that will go on for some time. Ultimately, I don't believe Russia can sustain this. I don't think they can hold the territory. I don't think they have the supplies, the ammunition, the leadership, the chain of command to be able to do it. But it will be a long, difficult effort for Ukraine to push the Russians back from here. And I also worry that Europe and the United States will want to push for a settlement, a ceasefire of some kind, rather than to see the fighting continue and to continue to supply Ukraine. That's something I think we all need to be working against. There should be no Ukraine fatigue, and there should be no reward for Russia's aggression.
But you said also that Ukraine will by no means is going to defeat them, will be defeated. What gives you this optimism? Does it mean that US and the whole world will supply weapons to Ukraine endlessly until Ukraine is going to win, or how is going to happen? Or will financial macroeconomic support would arrive also to Ukraine or not? So because without this kind of support, it will be difficult for Ukraine to win, no?
Yeah, well, so again, we're talking about Ukraine surviving as a sovereign and independent European democracy. And I think that's assured by the Ukrainian people themselves. They are Ukrainians, they are not Russians. They are passionate about protecting their homeland. This is not going to change. And this means Ukraine will always be Ukraine. Second, yes, the US has committed to continue to supply Ukraine for as long as it takes. Our ambassador there, who's doing a great job, Bridget Brink, just said this again the other day to reiterate it. So we will not allow Ukraine to be defeated. And likewise, I think the European Union is committed to making sure that Ukraine survives. Now, Ukraine winning and pushing the Russian forces out of the country, that's where I begin to worry, where the US and European support may not go far enough. And that's what we need to keep pushing on.
And you said also that it's going to be a long effort, and presumably, obviously not this year, it's going to stop next year as well. So how long is going to sustain? How long it's going to continue?
Well, let's break this into time periods. From now until the end of the year, Russian forces will be largely exhausted. They will not have the capacity for offensive operations, and they will be trying to dig in and hold the territories that they have taken. Ukrainian forces will be going on counteroffensives in these places that I mentioned, Kherson, from the direction of Zaporizhia to break the land bridge outside of Kharkiv. That will go on this summer and fall, and I think be relatively successful for Ukraine. Then we're in the period of the winter of, say early next year into the spring and summer. It'll be difficult. It'll be slower going, I would think. Russian forces might collapse in a few places, but they will be dug in many other places. And this also coincides with the winter, and that means energy issues both for Ukraine and for Europe as a whole. And it'll create different dynamics, pushing for some kind of ceasefire to see if energy can be supplied to Ukraine and Europe throughout the winter. That's going to be a challenging time. And then we're into a longer term period. We're talking next summer onward. Russia will have been able to reorganize its military by then, maybe resupply, maybe build new ammunition again. And Ukraine will have been able to resupply as well. And we'll be into a new phase of the war next year, but one where I think Ukraine is again fundamentally in a better position than it was in when the war started in February of this year.
Mm. And also some people are saying, some experts are saying that Ukraine and Russia are not going to coexist in this situation where we are. So basically, in case Ukraine wins, then Russia will collapse. In case Russia wins, then Ukraine is not going to exist. And do you agree with this, or it is probably premature to say in this regard?
Well, I do agree if we're specific about what we mean by Russia. If by Russia we mean Putin's authoritarian rule in Russia, then yes, I agree with that, because he has committed himself personally to the destruction of Ukraine and the elimination of Ukraine as a state, as a people, as a culture, as an identity. And he's not going to give up on that, which means that he has to be defeated. But it may be that he is defeated and Russia continues as a state with a different leadership, one that is going to be more rational, and there might be a way of creating some kind of peace again. But as long as Putin is driving the train and trying to destroy Ukraine, Ukrainians will never accept that and will fight back and seek to defeat Russian forces.
Mm. And do you think that in some way Belarus, Belarusia, in case they step into the war, will change the course of the war? Will it make it more difficult for Ukraine to defeat or to actually to win or not?
I think getting Belarus involved in the war against Ukraine would paradoxically open up a new front for Putin. That the Belarusian government is afraid of arming their own army because they're afraid that the army would turn against the regime in Belarus. You already have many Belarusian volunteers who have crossed over the border to fight with Ukrainian forces against the Russians. And if the Russians would try to instrumentalize Belarusian military to take part in the fighting, it could very well backfire on him, create a challenge to the Lukashenko regime, and actually stretch Russian forces further, trying to control that while also fighting in Ukraine. So that's why we haven't seen Belarus enter the war to date, and I think it is increasingly unlikely that they will do so.
Mm. And those people who are staying now in Kiev, do you think that they should be really nervous with regards to potential new attacks against Kiev, or everything should be all right?
Nothing is all right. What I think the people in Kiev need to remember is that one of the things that Russia can do is launch missile strikes anytime. They don't achieve any military effect. They won't topple the government. They won't destroy Ukraine, but they can bring about destruction and kill people and kill infrastructure in the capital. And that is quite possible, and Russia can do it at any time. It's one of the things where, as Ukraine begins to retake territory from Russian forces, they may just launch a few missile strikes against cities in the center and west of Ukraine just because they can, whereas they can't do much else. That's what we saw in Odessa just a few days ago. They promised to let the grain exports go, but then they shelled a few places in the Odessa port just to show that they can, even though it achieves zero military effect. The other thing that I worry about with people in Kyiv is that people should not overestimate the normality of the situation. It would be easy for me if I were there to forget that there is intense fighting going on hundreds of miles away, and that this still presents a risk to Ukraine. So the people in Kyiv not only need to be vigilant about potential strikes there, but also keep up that wartime mentality and that fighting spirit which carried Ukraine so successfully so far, because the war is far from over.
Mm. But the point is that, yes, we see many businesses which are resilient enough. They find their way. And many CEOs of companies and many actually team members of member companies came back to Kiev, in not only to Kiev, but to their normal places. And they try to do business as usual. But still, we see that economic situation in Ukraine is really devastating. And we have inflation which exceeds 30% by the end of the year. We have GDP fall, which is substantial. Do you think that this kind of situation in Ukraine impacts severely the situation in the world, or it's overestimated impact? Because now we see that the globe is going to enter as well into the global recession, probably most likely. What's your view on this?
Yeah. So inflation is a global issue now. It's not just a Ukrainian issue. It's not just an American issue. We're having inflation at 9.1% annual rate right now, and that is likely to go up as much as Is it
because of COVID? Is it because of COVID that or not?
Well, that's what I was going to say. There are many reasons for this that don't have anything to do with Ukraine, and COVID is one of them. COVID interrupted global supply chains. China shut down Shanghai for a long period of time. Exports from China have been down. The global supply chain shortages have led to increases in prices because of supply and demand. There just hasn't been enough supply. So that's one thing. That also relates to energy markets, where independent of the war in Ukraine, there has been an energy supply shortage because the economy was bouncing back after COVID, but supply was not bouncing back. And in fact, Russia was artificially restricting supply of energy in order to put pressure on Europe and put pressure on Ukraine. So that has led to an increase in prices. The US administration has a self-inflicted wound of trying to convince companies not to invest in oil and gas because they believe in green energy. And that has also taken potential US oil and gas supplies off the global market, which has led to the continuation of a shortage of supply compared to what there would have been. So a lot of factors in this that don't have anything to do with the war. Then you add on top of this the war in Ukraine, where particularly Ukraine's food exports have led to a shortage of food supplies in particularly Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. And this has increased global commodity prices. And the energy effects of Russia's war have also been felt in Europe, and that has affected global supply prices as well. So it contributes to that. Ukraine's inflation is driven by all of this, and also by the disruption of the economy caused by the war, which means the ability to export, higher costs of transportation, inability to get things out through transportation, businesses having to shut down because of security of their facilities or their personnel, or interruption of their operations that they are now trying to get restarted, the unexploded ordnance in the fields, the mining in the fields. These are things that have all impacted the Ukrainian economy. But this is unique to the wartime situation, and something where it is critical that the European Union follow through with the budgetary support to Ukraine and follow through with guarantees of investments and getting the Ukrainian economy restarted through efforts such as demining, through reinsurance of the insurance industry to help investment, to help businesses reopen, because it's going to take, just as the war is an extraordinary thing, it'll take an extraordinary effort to overcome the impacts of war to get the economy fully back online. That's going to take a lot more effort than has happened so far.
Yeah, because the situation is really very difficult for companies, and most likely it will really worsen further next year. But do you think that U.S. investors are going to come to Ukraine even in the current setup, like war setup, or it will be not possible? Because I see actually some of the companies would be willing to come. It's like rare so far examples, but nevertheless, what are the moods in the
Well, Anna, you and I saw this at the Lugano Conference on Ukraine Recovery as well. There is extraordinary goodwill towards Ukraine coming from the US government, US private sector, European governments and private sector. There's tremendous goodwill. But what is lacking is an understanding of how. How do you actually reinvest in Ukraine? What are the guarantees that companies could have on security? What are the guarantees on investment? What is the rule of law environment? There's still a lot of uncertainty there, but the will is there. And to give you illustrations, I know of US defense companies that would like to invest in Ukraine, even as a joint venture with pieces of Ukroboronprom, in order to produce munitions, in order to conduct demining operations, produce drones. I know of American energy companies that have won product sharing agreements in Ukraine that want to get in and resume their investments and resume their operations, but they need help with demining because the fields where they would be working have been hit with unexploded ordnance and with mines. So there are a number of things that need to come together, but the will is there, and I think it can be done. What I left Lugano feeling rather disappointed that despite all the goodwill, there doesn't seem yet to be a good plan. And I think that this is something where we need not only Ukraine to develop a plan, as it has done, as big and unwieldy and unstructured or overstructured as it is. We need the EU and the United States to appoint senior coordinators for our resources and to be coordinating with Ukraine and developing something that's much more operational.
I had the same feeling after Lugano, because it seems to me that indeed, actually, this practical plan is missing. And so far, yes, goodwill is there, but nevertheless, when it comes to concrete support, which is actually introducing money, investments, whatever, it's really missing. And so far, it's still missing the political will in order to resolve these issues, which are connected to political insurance risks and political risk insurance and this kind of stuff, which would allow investments to come into the country. But our
can I add to that, Anna? Because you're exactly right.
Yeah.
There was very little understanding among the EU and Ukrainian representatives of the importance of the private sector. Government-driven resources will flow to Ukraine from the US, from the EU, but they will never be enough to get Ukraine on its feet. It'll be the private sector that has the resources and scale to get Ukraine on its feet. And those government-driven funds need to be organized in a way to leverage and empower that private sector activity.
Yeah, because quite often we are being asked by our members and beyond, where is the money actually for Ukrainian economy?
Right.
We are still missing that, and quite often we have political statements which say that we are going to get, Ukraine is going to get X amount of support, and it may even not arrive in due term. So basically, there is a discrepancy between political statements, public statements, and then real support which is coming. And why do you think it is happening? Is it because of some political thing which is going around this, or why is it so? Why this discrepancy exists?
Yeah. So there's a great saying, I didn't make it up, but it is true. Never assume malice when incompetence will suffice. And that is the case here. I don't think there's any political problem. I don't think there's any ill will toward Ukraine or lack of support. It is sheer incompetence on the part of our bureaucracies in the US and the European Union in solving problems to enable assistance to flow. It bogs down with rules and regulations and personnel, and questions that need to be answered or procedures that need to be followed first. It just bogs things down. The European Union promised $9 billion in budget, or 9 billion euros in budgetary support for Ukraine. And as of the Lugano conference, it had still not moved, even though they had the will to do it. And that's sheer bureaucracy and incompetence that was blocking them.
Yeah, meanwhile, people are dying, and this is really very painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our participants are asking, do you think China will give support to Russia? And in general, could you also give more details on the US-China relationships, and how do you think it's going to develop? Because obviously this is another very important stage of development in the global economy and geopolitics.
Yeah, this is a great question. There are so many dimensions to it. I'll try to touch on them in separate fashion here. First, China does not want to be associated with Russia's war on Ukraine. People always ask a question about China-Russia alignment and alliance. China has its own interests. It doesn't care about Russian interests. It cares about Chinese interests. And sometimes they overlap with Russian interests. Oftentimes they don't. So first off, you have Russia attacking a sovereign state and a member of the United Nations. China doesn't like that. Russia is doing a poor job militarily and behaving in ways that are unacceptable, committing war crimes, raping women, targeting maternity hospitals, killing children, execution-style killings of civilians, incompetence in the military operation. China doesn't want to be associated with this at all. It also has a much greater stake in its economic ties with Europe and the United States than it has in its economic ties with Russia. So if Russia wants to avoid sanctions by going through China, okay, that's fine. China can make money off of that. But if it's going to put Chinese banks and businesses at risk of sanctions themselves, they're not going to stick their necks out for Russia. They have bigger interests in this. So I think we really need to look at this through Chinese eyes and what their interests are, rather than through the lens of, is China helping Russia? The second thing is that China does indeed want to take over Taiwan. It views Taiwan as part of China already, and one is a one China policy. It's not a member state, it's not of the UN, it's not an independent state as China sees it. It is part of China, and it wants to assert control over Taiwan. But it wants to do this in a way where it inherits a rich Taiwan, not like Russia, where it destroys the pieces of Ukraine it's trying to take over. China wants to be much smarter about this. Third, there is a season every year that we go through where China's activities are ramped up a bit in East Asia, and we are seeing that again now. An increase in the military tempo, an increase in the adventuresomeness of Chinese activities and operations. You could say aggressiveness, but I don't really believe it's aggressive. I think it's just testing the boundaries and trying to push out the boundaries a little bit every year. And we're going through a phase like that now. And the US is monitoring this and has counter deployments in Asia. We're trying to maintain a balance of power. It is tense and it increases year by year, but it's not an immediate conflict, and I don't think it will be. But one day it could be. And that's what we have to keep watching out for. And then finally, the US remains focused on China. Jake Sullivan and the White House in particular, Kurt Campbell, they continuously keep a focus on the US presence in Asia and the need to push back on China in Asia as the big long-term challenge. As painful as the Russian war in Ukraine is, and as much as the US is helping Ukraine now, things we should have done years ago, we are finally doing, we still have a focus on China, which I believe is important.
Mm-hmm. And why this whole scandal with Nancy, which is going to actually enter Taiwan or go to Taiwan, happening? Why is this so important that China really wants to apply military power in order to prevent this visit from happening?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that the Chinese want to apply military power to prevent the visit from happening. They want to object to it. They want to hint at the use of military force. They want to raise the stakes for the United States in doing this. And unfortunately, I think this is a case where President Biden and the White House have sent the wrong signals. So first off, again, as I said, we're in this phase of adventuresomeness on the part of China in East Asia and around Taiwan right now. In that period, people like Nancy Pelosi or others, members of Congress, senators, Defense Department officials, think that it's a good idea to visit Taiwan in order to show support and show resolve so that China does not become too adventuresome. That the Chinese need to think about where the limits are. And then Nancy Pelosi saying that she wants to do this gets pushed back from the White House. Not a good thing. We need to show unity on our side. And the way President Biden pushes back is to say the military doesn't think it's a good idea right now, which is a terrible signal to send because it implies that we are concerned about the Chinese military, which it's a message we do not want to convey. We want to convey to the Chinese military that we can handle whatever they can throw. So a number of mistakes made, I think, in handling this. But that said, the dynamic still is one where China is trying to push the envelope out, and the US, people like Nancy Pelosi and the Pentagon are trying to say, no, we are here and we are prepared to defend peace and a balance of power and respect for Taiwan in Asia.
Mm. But in any case, it looks like that we are entering some new phase, new era, stage of development of the globe, and it looks like it's far from being peaceful to a certain extent. And obviously, all those risks emerge. And if we coming back to Ukraine, it's also very, I don't know, it's really not possible to understand, it's not possible to exclude that the war is going to spill over the territory of Ukraine. What do you think in this regard? Do you think that Russia will make an attack against one of the NATO countries, or it's not possible because it's illogical?
Great question, because that's how we started. This whole war started, the war beginning in February started out of an illogical decision. That being said, my judgment is this: Russia has found that its military has its hands full and is incapable of advancing in Ukraine, just dealing with the Ukrainian military. The last thing they want is to have to face another front where they would be confronted directly with NATO country military power. They couldn't handle it. So the Russians do not want to do that now. So I don't see much risk of the war extending beyond Ukraine today. However, this gets to the bigger picture and comes back to China. If Russia is allowed to succeed in taking some territory in Ukraine, and there's some new ceasefire, and Russia regroups and rearms and repositions its military forces, it will try again to take over Ukraine. And it may try again to take over territory in other countries as well, such as the Baltic states or Poland, or could go elsewhere, say to Moldova, or even something new in Georgia. So if Russia and Putinism are allowed to stand as they are, I think we can expect there to be new things in the future. On the other hand, if Russia is stopped in Ukraine, defeated in Ukraine, it does not gain any reward for aggression, I think that diminishes the chances that it would attack other countries or widen the war to other places. And from a Chinese perspective, if Russia is successful in Ukraine, even if it takes time and several waves of effort, that's one message. And that's something that I think China would think, okay, it works. On the other hand, if Russia is actually defeated in Ukraine, cannot take new territories, and is weakened as a result, that is a different signal to China. And that's very much the signal that we in the US and the West should want to send to China, that there is no gain for aggression.
Mm. And do you think it's in general realistic that Ukraine can really restore its territories, even including Crimea, occupied territories before 24th of February? So, what is the probable scenario of coming back to peace in this regard?
There will not be peace as long as Putin is in power, because he's determined to try to destroy Ukraine, and Ukraine will not accept it. I think it's unlikely that Ukraine will succeed in taking all of its territory back by February. It would be nice, it would be a good thing for all the people who live in these territories, but I don't think it can happen that quickly, despite all of the efforts that will be made. And I therefore think that you're going to see a longer period of high intensity but localized conflict. And I think that will go on well into next year.
So you mean also southern Ukraine will be also as localized conflicts, or just eastern Ukraine? What is the territory? Because for business is also important to understand.
I know. I do believe the Ukrainians will succeed in pushing the Russians out of Kherson. Mm-hmm. And this will create some breathing space for Mykolaiv and Odessa. And I think the naval side of this will work more and more in Ukraine's favor as well. So there'll be some greater stability in the southwest of Ukraine. Around Zaporizhia and towards Melitopol, I see that as an area of intense localized conflict. And eastern Ukraine also. I don't think that Ukraine will be able to take back a lot of territory in the southeast, Melitopol, Mariupol, in the near term, but I think eventually it gets there. And likewise in eastern Ukraine, I don't see Russia advancing any further. Maybe they'll try to take Bakhmut. That might be the next big push, but I don't see them really getting all the way there or any further. And I do see Ukraine having the ability to push them back. What Ukraine is doing is using these HIMARS, these high mobility artillery systems and drones to attack Ukrainian supply chains, ammunition and food and fuel, and that's forcing the Russian supply chains, and that's forcing the Russians to source their supplies from further back. That's creating more risk to their lines of communication, and it's going to make it more difficult for them to hold the territory they've taken now.
Mm-hmm. But really, actually one of our listeners is asking what international community can do in order to somehow resolve the situation for the benefit of Ukraine, as far as I understand. In case the question was somehow connected to certain sentence of Kurt, actually you can also specify because I just see this in the chat. Can you also comment on this? What more can international community make? Mm-hmm. And by the way, connected to this, I would like to ask how long the appetite of US will be kept in order to support Ukraine.
Yeah. So let's start with the end of that. The US factor here is important to understand. There is very strong bipartisan support for Ukraine, Republican and Democrat, House and Senate, and in the general public. That there is a clear understanding that Russia is an aggressor, that it has committed war crimes, and that Ukraine is fighting for its life and deserves support. So that is very strong. When President Biden went to the Congress earlier this year to ask for funding for the rest of the budget year, he asked for $34 billion, and the Congress turned around and gave him $40 billion, $6 billion more than he asked for. So that shows you the kind of support on Capitol Hill. There are fringes in both political parties, the far right and the Republicans, the far left on the Democrats, who don't want to support Ukraine for their own reasons. The left wants to support other things, or they're afraid of Russia, or they want to make peace with Russia. The far right also because they want to make peace with Russia, or they want to blame the Biden administration for being a failure, and they want to use Ukraine as an excuse or as a reason why Biden is a failure. So Those fringes, however, will not control either party, and they will not have the decisive votes in the Senate or the House. So you will have continued strong support from the US for several more years, yeah, for sure. So I think people need to be confident in that the US is committed here.
So do you think that the war is going to continue for 7 years?
Well, several, not seven, several.
I see several. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and here, when I say several, I'm thinking
Because I started to be nervous, already.
it's been 8 years already. So, let's remember, we've all survived. But when I say several, I was thinking specifically of two, which is we have midterm elections now that will likely result in the Republicans taking over the House and the Senate. They will probably put more pressure on the administration to do more for Ukraine. The Democrats running the House and the Senate are respectful of President Biden and the role of the White House. So they don't want to push him too much. The Republicans will be quite happy to push President Biden to do more. So for the next 2 years, with the Republicans running the House and the Senate and support behind them from the Democrats in the House and the Senate, I think you'll see great support for Ukraine. Then we have a presidential election in 2024, and it is too early to say what will happen. You have President Trump looking like he may run. You have President Biden claiming that he will run. Both of them are too old and too stubborn to be what we need right now, in my view. So we'll see what actually happens in the election. And that's a few years down the road, and a lot will happen between now and then in Ukraine.
And by the way, how do you think that? Do you think it's probable to have nuclear attack against Ukraine? Because there are many speculations on this, and many people are really afraid in Ukraine whether it's possible to have it. Yeah. But what's your understanding of the situation?
Well, first off, it is rational to be afraid of nuclear weapons. So people should be cautious and thoughtful when it comes to dealing with nuclear weapons. I don't think it is likely for a couple of reasons, but it's not impossible. So even a small chance of nuclear use is something to be concerned about. But I don't think it is likely for these reasons. First off, a strategic use of nuclear weapons by Russia against the United States or against NATO will result in nuclear retaliation against Russia and destroy Russia. So I think mutual assured destruction, or in this case, assured destruction of Russia, works. And I don't believe that President Putin or the Russian military will do that because they know it would lead to their own destruction. Tactical nuclear use inside Ukraine is then the next level. And there, I believe that it also makes no sense because Russia would be destroying the target that it would hope to take. It makes the area, the land, the space where nuclear weapons are used unusable. It'll be contaminated with radiation for hundreds of years. So this is not also in Russia's interest. Third, the doctrine that Russia has of escalate in order to de-escalate, that makes sense if you are repelling an aggressor. Someone attacking Russia, use nuclear weapons against that attacker to stop them. But if you are actually trying to seize and take and hold territory, that doctrine doesn't make sense because you can't hold the territory that you've just nuked. So I don't think that's rational. And then fourth, I think the Russian military is very concerned that any nuclear use would bring Western military force directly into the conflict against the Russian military, which they cannot sustain. And they know that. So they do not want to draw US or Western forces into the conflict by using nuclear weapons. And fifth, this could then be a breaking point between Putin and the military, which Putin must surely be aware of, and therefore would be very cautious about ordering or attempting to order the military to use nuclear weapons, because he can't afford to have that break. So that's a lot of reasons why I think it's unlikely, but again, not impossible.
Not impossible.
We should all be careful.
It looks like that it's really not impossible, because politically wise, it seems to be that they don't care about the territory they're attacking. And frankly speaking, it looks like that they just want to destroy the territory just to have buffer zone, and that's it. So that's why, you know, one of the reasons it's really very hard to be.
Yeah, it's a crazy mindset. A buffer zone against what? Because nobody's threatening Russia. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah, earlier there was a point that I want to come back to. Someone asked, what more should the US and the West be doing? And there's a long list. We should be, on the sanctions side, we should be tightening up the sanctions. We should be getting secondary sanctions in place on smaller banks so that Russia cannot evade, you know, the financial sanctions by using small banks to service the big banks. We should be doing secondary sanctions against anyone who's facilitating financial ties with Russia, and that could potentially dry up anything that's happening with China. We should be, Europe in particular, should be accelerating its cessation of Russian oil and gas imports. We shouldn't be waiting for Russia to turn it off and threatening Europe and Europe feeling afraid. Europe should get ahead of this and make plans to get off of Russian oil and gas imports starting now, as soon as possible. And then we could sanction those industries once Europe is off those oil and gas imports, which will make it harder for them to turn to other destinations to sell that oil and gas. This is a cash cow for Russia, and we need to shut down that cash cow. On the military side, we need to stop putting limits on what we give Ukraine. Why there's a restriction on the range of artillery that we're giving. We can give them longer range artillery. We should be supporting fighter aircraft for Ukraine. We should be supporting more anti-ship systems. We should be helping Ukraine end the blockade of Odessa port and getting that grain out to global markets. And we should be helping with demining starting now. We should be doing this in order to help the economy get back on its feet as quickly as possible.
I agree. Actually, you already answered this question, because one of the questions of the audience was, what do you think about the effectiveness of sanctions against Russia? Is there some additional pack of sanctions assessed? What could be? So you actually presented your point of view on this. And the next question is, how do you see the occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? Can Russian forces be surrounded there finally and asked to surrender?
This is very dangerous. Again, Russia has used the seizure of civilian nuclear facilities as part of its war campaign. It has not allowed normal operation of the plants. It has not allowed the crews normal rest and rotation. It has interrogated the crews there. It has put military forces around the plants, making it a place where they can fire from, but very dangerous for Ukraine to fire back. These are all things that should be explored as war crimes because of in the future, they should be made war crimes. It's too dangerous for military forces to act this way. There ought to be protocols for not endangering civilian nuclear facilities. And what the questioner suggests is the only safe way to restore Ukrainian control is to surround, cut them off, surround them, and offer safe passage out for the Russian forces without any military threat, because there needs to be a safe and peaceful transfer of control so that Ukrainian authorities can put these things back into safe operation again. You don't want the risk of bombing or conflict around the power plant. If there were sabotage there by the Russian forces, it would destroy themselves. So hopefully they would not do that, but that's also a risk. So the only safe way is to actually defeat the Russians elsewhere, surround them, and allow passage out.
Mm. Why the US is staying short of setting clearly as its goal the dismantling and disarming of Russia. Here, in the leadership of Ronald Reagan, scale is required from the US. Only in that case we will make the world the safer place. It is observable.
It's a statement, and I agree with the statement. The Biden administration is very concerned about, as they put it, World War III, getting into a direct conflict with Russia. And so they are avoiding those kinds of things. But I agree with the statement made by the questioner.
The question is, do you think that Lend-Lease can be a game changer in the war? And what can we expect first? When can we expect the first suppliers of arms on the Lend-Lease, and what volumes of arms can we expect?
Yeah. So what Lend-Lease is a larger scale of what the U.S. has already been doing. We have been drawing down on US stocks and giving them to Ukraine, and then spending money to resupply those stocks for our own military, or buying things directly from industry and sending it to Ukraine. Lend-Lease is a vehicle by which Ukraine can draw down funds to acquire US weapons, both from the US government or from US industry, and bring them into Ukraine to support its forces. So it is not that different from what we're already doing. It's just a larger scale. And here we seem to have some hesitation on the US side that I don't understand, of giving Ukraine things in pieces over time, rather than doing everything we can to create momentum to defeat Russia now. For instance, we have given Ukraine 4 HIMARS artillery systems a month for 4 months, rather than 16 at once. I can't explain it. It makes no sense to me. What you've heard in the media, the US wanted to see how well they were incorporated in the Ukrainian forces and how well they were employed. Gee, I guess we're surprised they were successfully incorporated and successfully used. Why that's a surprise, who knows? We should be doing more just right out of the box, and using Lend-Lease more assertively is something that we should be doing as well.
And then the next question is, what is your view on how war risks could be covered for investors who have intention to come to Ukraine?
This is a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. It is one of the most important things that governments can do. As I said, the amount of aid available from the EU and from the United States will never be enough to fully restart and to compensate for Ukraine's economy. It will only be the resumption of a private sector economy that saves Ukraine. And here, what governments can do is dedicate some of the resources that they're doing to insurance or reinsurance for investors, equity insurance, or insuring the insurers, so that we reduce the risk to investment, so investors are willing to then put capital on the table to invest in Ukraine and restore the economy, revive the economy, rebuild infrastructure, build Ukraine back better, connect it to the European Union, all of that. So this is something that is critically important. At the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Lugano, the person who brought this up was Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary of the UK. She said the UK can have a special role in doing this because of the City of London, and can be a leader that shows the way for the European Union. She is now in line to become Prime Minister of the UK, and the UK will host next year's Ukraine Recovery Conference. So this topic of investment insurance, I hope, becomes a major topic for everybody over the next few months.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's hope that it will bring actually practical results, so that investors could be really insured in order to come to Ukraine, because without that, as you said, it will be difficult to expect the economy to rebound. What is about Russia after Putin and his devil's circle? It is another question of our audience.
Yeah. Well, I just think the answer is we can't know. These things are all cloaked in secrecy. I think that there are plenty of people in the elite in Russia who know that Putin is destroying Russia, that he is destroying the military at an amazing pace. Maybe 40 to 50% of the combat power is gone. He is now throwing the regions into the fight, but not necessarily as many Russians. That's creating internal divisions inside Russia among the regions and Moscow. He is destroying the state-owned enterprises and the economy. People are hurting as a result of this, but the oligarchs and the elites are hurting the most. It has caused capital flight and human flight from Russia as a result of this, and everybody knows it. So I think there are plenty of people who would like to reverse what Putin's doing if there was a way for him not to be in power anymore. Currently, there's no pathway for that. Yes, there are people around who might be just as bad or crazy as Putin, but then there are probably plenty of others who are not. The one thing that keeps Russia working right now is that Putin is in power in the center. Once he's gone, I think you're going to see factionalism in Russia and a lot of infighting over who's in charge. And it won't be so clean and directed as it is now under Putin.
Mm. And since we are approaching the end of our meeting, I would like to ask you what kind of advice you can give to Ukrainians and businesses which are operating in Ukraine. What to be prepared?
Well, first off, try. I know there are risks both to your personnel and to your capital, but this is a civilizational struggle. And Ukraine will be part of European civilization for forever, for as far as the eye can see. So you're on the right side of things by trying to get your operations up again, trying to help Ukraine. This will eventually pay off, and you will be seen as one of the companies that helped do that at a time when it mattered. So as much as there are risks, it's the right thing to do, and it will be successful. It's just incredibly risky and difficult right now, but it has to be done. And that's a great segue into the final question in the Q&A here, which is the American University Kyiv is opening up for its teaching of classes beginning in September. Our application process is open online. We are exceeding our target for master's degree students. We are about on target for undergraduate students. It will be all online education starting in September, but we hope to move to in-person education beginning in January, assuming things continue as they are. And one of the things that businesses can do is get in touch with the university. We are creating vehicles to provide scholarships to students. We recognize that tuition may be difficult for some of the students in this wartime phase, and financial aid for students, not coming to the school directly, but going to students, will be something that I think would be significant. But what we're doing with this university is creating the workforce of the future. So it's a worthy investment for business as well.
It's amazing. And one final question, if you have the opportunity to accommodate that, it's from audience. Is there a real danger that Russia will hold referendums in occupied territories, as a result will call those territories as part of Russia, and that as a result will let them nuke Ukraine or to treat Ukraine's attempts to win those territories back as an attack on Russian territory?
Yeah. Everyone knows that any referenda in these territories would be phony, even the Russians. So as much as they would say exactly what your questioner just said, oh, we had a referendum, oh, they want to be part of Russia, oh, they're now annexed to Russia, now they're part of Russia, so if you attack them, you're attacking Russia. Yes, they would say all of that, but even the Russians would draw a difference between attacking these newly taken territories where they had a phony referendum versus actually attacking Russia itself.
Okay, Kurt, many thanks for your insights, for your considerations and observations. It will be very interesting to meet you again and sometime soon,
Yes.
understand where we are heading and how your university is going to develop. And we will actually supply you also information on how businesses are doing. And hopefully in the somehow foreseeable future, we'll see also insurance, political risks insurance and war insurance in place, so that more investments would come to the territory of Ukraine. And then obviously we can compare our observations and feelings. So thank you so much for that. And dear friends, really be safe. Everything needs to be stopped in terms of Ukraine, and I hope you will be in safe zone anyhow. Okay, all the best, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Great to be with all of you.